The derelict Qatarian freighter, Zephyr, drifted powerless, stranded deep in uncharted space. On board, the human and Qatarian crew faced a grim reality: certain death unless they could cooperate long enough to restore the crippled ship. Anthony Williams, a desperate human mechanic drowning in debt, had signed on with the aging cargo vessel as a last resort. Captain Gruss, a gruff Qatarian, only grudgingly hired the cheap human labor. Tension festered from the start, with a dismissive Qatarian crew treating their new human shipmates as inferior. Things had gone from bad to catastrophic when a lucrative job ferrying priceless alien artifacts turned into a fight for survival. A disastrous engine failure knocked the Zephyr wildly off course, nearly destroying the ship if not for Anthony's quick jury-rigged patch. But the temporary fix came at a steep cost, leaving them marooned in the void with dwindling power and supplies. As Anthony worked grueling shifts alongside Gruss to keep the ship from totally falling apart, an uneasy truce emerged. The captain saw firsthand how human ingenuity and relentless grit could be a valuable asset. Bonding moments sprouted in the galley during ration meals, each species swapping stories of distant homes. But clashing cultures still sparked fights over limited resources and fragile power dynamics. Their precarious situation turned deadly when a scavenger band, drawn by the Zephyr's distress beacon, launched a vicious assault on the hobbled freighter. The humans and Qatarians scrambled to bolster their feeble defenses as the raiders closed in. With no other options, Anthony and the human crew bet everything on a desperate gambit, jerry-rigging the mysterious cargo into lethal booby traps to even the odds. In the frenzied battle that followed, the unlikely allies stood together, fighting for their very survival. The battle-scarred Zephyr hung in the void, a battered sentinel standing watch over the carnage of the raider assault. Scorch marks pitted her hull and shattered viewports gaped like wounds. But she had endured. On the bridge, an exhausted Anthony and Captain Gruss surveyed the damage, running on fumes and adrenaline. The once adversarial crews had fought as one, humans and Qatarians shedding blood together, but the cost had been high. Too many empty bunks in the crew quarters now. A proximity alert shattered the weary calm. Gruss cursed in Qatarian, clawed fingers flying over the controls. Unknown ship dropping out of hyperspace, bearing 227 Mark 14. Looks like an Arcturian cruiser, sleek, built for speed. Anthony frowned at the readouts. They're on an intercept course, but no active target locks. What are they playing at? Uneasy murmurs rippled through the crew as the alien ship drew alongside the Zephyr, dwarfing their freighter. An incoming transmission crackled over the comms, and a striking Arcturian visage filled the view screen. Angular features, luminous eyes, and an air of regal bearing. Greetings, I am Prince Zoran of Arcturia. I seek refuge aboard your vessel. The forces of the Arcturian Empire are in close pursuit. Gruss narrowed his eyes, stance guarded. This is a civilian ship. We don't want any part of your imperial squabbles. I assure you, this is no mere squabble, Zoran pressed on, his voice urgent. I uncovered evidence of unspeakable atrocities committed by the Empire and dared to speak out. Now I am a hunted fugitive. Anthony and the human crew exchanged charged looks, a current of unease running through them. Tales of the Empire's ruthless conquests and brutal subjugation of other races were all too common in the space lanes. Captain, we have to help him, Anthony argued, stepping forward. If we turn him away, we're no better than the Empire. Gruss growled, caught between fear and conscience. The Qatarians muttered among themselves, clearly torn. But Anthony's impassioned plea struck a chord. They had all chafed under the yoke of oppression in one form or another. The human is right, Gruss declared gruffly. No one should have to stand alone against tyranny. Your Highness, permission to come aboard granted. As the airlock hissed open and Prince Zoran strode onto the Zephyr, Anthony couldn't shake the feeling that their fates had just become inexorably intertwined with the brewing storm of galactic politics. The prince wasted no time, summoning them to an impromptu war council in the ship's cramped mess hall. My friends, I cannot thank you enough for your courage in sheltering me, but I fear the Empire will not relent in their pursuit. We must find a way to even the odds. Zoran revealed tantalizing snippets of cutting-edge Arcturian technology, exotic schematics of weapons and cloaking devices. The human engineers pored over the designs with growing excitement, neurons firing as they connected the dots to the ancient weapon artifacts in their hold. With these, and your artifacts, we can transform the Zephyr into a ship unlike any the galaxy has seen. Anthony breathed, a fierce light kindling in his eyes. A ghost in the void, striking from shadows. And so an unholy union of ancient and modern was born in the Zephyr's guts. Anthony and his team working feverishly to splice impossibly advanced systems into the ship's outdated frame. The Katarians lent their brawn and technical knowledge, Gruss keeping a watchful eye over the breakneck upgrades. Day and night ceased to hold meaning as they raced against time, Imperial scouts already snooping at the edges of their scopes. Prince Zoran moved among them like a phantom, dispensing kingly encouragement even as his eyes held the haunted look of a man who had stared into the abyss of his own civilization's sins. And then the Imperial ships were upon them, a pack of hungry wolves scenting wounded prey. The Zephyr shuddered as the first salvo of cannon fire battered her shields, alarms shrieking in protest. "All hands to battle stations," Gruss roared over the din. "Time to see what our new tricks can do." Anthony sprinted for the bridge, heart pounding in time with the thrum of the jury-rigged engines. This was the moment of truth, the baptism of fire that would make or break them all. On the console, the Imperial cruisers bristled with weapons, bearing down on the Zephyr with all the arrogant wrath of a bloated empire. But as the cloaking field snapped into place and the enhanced cannons thrummed with eldritch energies, a savage grin split Anthony's face. For the first time, looking out at the assembled might of the enemy, he let himself believe they had a fighting chance. Prince Zoran took his place at the secondary controls, a grim smile on his regal features as his fingers danced over the unfamiliar console. "For Arcturia," he whispered, "for the dream of a free galaxy." Gruss clapped a heavy hand on Anthony's shoulder, yellow eyes gleaming. "Take us in, human. Let's show these Imperial dogs the true measure of our fangs." The stars blurred into the streaks of hyperspace, and the Zephyr leapt to meet her destiny, no longer a mere freighter, but a blazing sword aimed at the heart of galactic tyranny. The battle was about to be joined, and the universe would tremble before it was done. The Zephyr tore through hyperspace, leaving the Imperial fleet in its wake. Anthony's hands trembled as he powered down the weapon systems, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. They had survived, but for how long? "Set course for Rogue's Haven," Captain Gruss ordered, his gravelly voice cutting through the tense silence on the bridge. "We need allies, supplies, and a place to catch our breath." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "Rogue's Haven? Isn't that place crawling with every lowlife in the sector?" "Precisely," Gruss replied with a toothy grin. "And right now, those lowlifes are exactly the kind of friends we need." The Zephyr dropped out of hyperspace near a massive, ramshackle space station that looked like it had been cobbled together from a dozen different shipwrecks. Neon signs flickered in 100 alien languages, advertising everything from exotic pleasures to illegal weaponry. As they docked, Gruss turned to Anthony and Prince Zoran. "Stay close. I've got an old contact here who might be able to help us." They made their way through crowded corridors, thick with the smell of alien spices and engine grease. Anthony's eyes darted from towering insectoid creatures to lithe reptilian humanoids haggling over contraband. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Gruss led them to a dimly lit alcove where a slender, blue-skinned alien sat behind a desk covered in holographic displays. Her four eyes blinked in rapid succession as she regarded them coolly. "Kylara," Gruss rumbled. "It's been a while." The Zytherian information broker's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Captain Gruss, I see you've gotten yourself into quite the predicament." Her gaze lingered on Zoran. "Or should I say your Royal Highness has?" Zoran stepped forward, his regal bearing at odds with their grimy surroundings. "Then you know why we're here." Kylara's fingers danced over her holo displays, bringing up news feeds and classified reports. "Oh yes, your little rebellion has caused quite the stir, but you have no idea how deep the currents of discontent truly run. For the next hour, Kylara laid out a web of information that made even Zoran's eyes widen in surprise. Entire sectors chafing under Imperial rule, secret resistance cells, and whispers of ancient technologies that could turn the tide of war. "I can help you," Kylara said, leaning back. "For the right price, of course." While Gruss and Zoran haggled with the broker, Anthony slipped away to explore the station. He found himself in a crowded cantina, the air thick with smoke and the clash of 100 alien languages. Anthony ordered a drink, grimacing at the neon green concoction the bartender slid his way. As he sipped the oddly sweet liquid, he overheard snatches of conversation, complaints about Imperial tariffs, tales of planets stripped bare by the Empire's war machine. "You look like you've got a story to tell," a gruff voice said beside him. Anthony turned to see a burly Centaurian watching him with interest. Anthony hesitated, then made a decision. He began to speak, softly at first, then with growing passion. He told of the Zephyr's transformation, of standing up to the Imperial fleet, of the prince who dared to speak out against injustice. As he spoke, a crowd began to gather. Aliens of all shapes and sizes pressed closer, hanging on his every word. Among them, a young Arcturian with fiery eyes listened intently, his hands clenched into fists. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the cantina's entrance. A group of hard-eyed individuals in nondescript clothing pushed their way inside, scanning the crowd intently. "Imperial spies," the young Arcturian hissed. "They're after the prince." Without hesitation, Anthony vaulted over the bar, grabbing a bottle as a makeshift weapon. The Arcturian was right beside him, fists raised. "I'm Jace," the Arcturian said with a fierce grin. "Let's show these Imperial dogs what we think of their tyranny." The cantina erupted into chaos. Fists and energy weapons flashed as Anthony and Jace fought their way toward the exit, covering each other's backs. They burst out into the corridor, nearly bowling over Zoran and Gruss, who had come looking for them. "Time to go," Anthony shouted, shoving them toward the Zephyr's docking bay. Jace fell in with them, blasting away at their pursuers with a stolen pistol. They made it to the ship with seconds to spare, the Zephyr's engines roaring to life as the airlock sealed shut. As they pulled away from the station, Anthony saw other ships rising to join them, a ragtag fleet of vessels crewed by those inspired to take a stand. In the days that followed, the Zephyr became a hive of activity. Anthony found himself in charge of a growing cadre of human engineers, working alongside Catarians and a dozen other species to upgrade their new allies' ships. Jace proved to be a natural pilot, taking to the Zephyr's enhanced systems like he was born to fly her. Anthony watched with pride as the young Arcturian put the ship through maneuvers that seemed to defy the laws of physics. As their fleet grew, so did their boldness. They struck at Imperial outposts, Jace leading the charge in lightning-fast hit-and-run attacks that left the Empire reeling. But with each victory came a cost, and soon the Empire's iron fist came down hard on the sectors that dared to rebel. When news reached them of an Imperial blockade threatening to starve an entire planet into submission, Anthony knew they faced an impossible choice. He found Gruss and Zoran on the bridge, their faces grim as they pored over tactical displays. "We can't just stand by and let those people suffer," Anthony said, his voice tight with emotion. Zoran nodded slowly. "You're right, but a frontal assault would be suicide." A plan began to form in Anthony's mind, a daring strategy that just might work. He laid it out for them, watching as hope rekindled in their eyes. Hours later, the rebel fleet dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the blockaded system. Ahead of them lay a gauntlet of Imperial warships, their weapons primed and ready. Anthony took a deep breath, steadying himself at the tactical station. Beside him, Jace's hands danced over the flight controls, a look of fierce concentration on his face. "All ships prepare to engage," Gruss growled. "May fortune favor the bold." With that, the Zephyr surged forward, leading the charge into the heart of the Empire's teeth. The battle for the fate of a planet, and perhaps the entire galaxy, had begun. The battle for the blockaded planet raged on, but Anthony's mind was already racing ahead. As the Zephyr wove through the chaos of energy beams and exploding ships, he pulled up schematics on his console, fingers flying over the interface. "Captain, I've got an idea," he called out to Gruss. "If we can break this blockade, we might have a shot at something bigger." Gruss's yellow eyes narrowed. "Spit it out, human." "The Imperial capital. We hit them where it hurts." Silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the distant rumble of explosions. Then Zoran nodded, a fierce light in his eyes. "It's time we took the fight to them." In the days that followed, the rebel fleet became a hive of feverish activity. Anthony led teams of human engineers and alien technicians in a mad scramble to upgrade their ships. They cannibalized damaged vessels, repurposed scrap, and pushed the limits of their cobbled-together technology. Jace and the other pilots ran endless drills, perfecting intricate attack patterns that pushed their enhanced ships to the breaking point. The young Arcturian's natural talent blossomed under the pressure, his maneuvers becoming so precise they seemed to defy physics itself. As they prepared, Anthony couldn't help but marvel at the diversity of the rebellion they'd assembled. Creatures that would have been mortal enemies mere weeks ago now worked side by side, united by a common purpose. Finally, the day arrived. The rebel fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Imperial capital system, cloaking fields humming. Anthony's palms were slick with sweat as he manned the tactical station, watching the imposing planetary defenses loom larger on the screens. Zoran's voice crackled over the comms, tense but steady. "There's our opening, a weak point in the shield grid, just where my contacts said it would be." The Zephyr led the charge, slipping through the gap like a knife between ribs. For a moment, Anthony dared to hope they'd made it through undetected. Then alarms blared across the Imperial city below, and swarms of fighters poured from hangars like angry insects from a disturbed hive. "All ships, engage!" Gruss roared. The space above the capital erupted into chaos. Imperial fighters swarmed around the rebel ships, only to find themselves outmaneuvered by Jace and his fellow pilots. Anthony's jury-rigged weapons sang, catching the enemy off guard with bursts of exotic energy. On the planet's surface, explosions bloomed as Zoran's resistance cells sprang into action. The Imperial forces found themselves fighting a war on two fronts, their carefully ordered ranks dissolving into confusion. "Now's our chance," Zoran said, his face grim with dedication. "Anthony, Gruss, you're with me. We're going after the Empress herself." They boarded a sleek shuttle, rocketing towards the sprawling Imperial palace. Anthony's retrofitted cloaking device strained under the barrage of scans, but held. They touched down on a landing pad, alarms already blaring. The trio fought their way through ornate corridors, Anthony's hastily assembled energy weapon spitting bursts of crackling blue fire. Elite guards fell before them, but each step was bought with sweat and desperation. They burst into the cavernous throne room, only to find it empty. A hologram flickered to life, showing the sneering face of the Empress. "Did you really think it would be so easy, rebels?" she taunted before the image winked out. "The bunker," Gruss growled. "She's gone to ground." They raced deeper into the palace complex, guided by stolen schematics. An ambush nearly caught them at the bunker entrance, but Anthony's quick thinking and a repurposed artifact-turned grenade cleared the way. The final confrontation came in a stark chamber deep beneath the earth. The Empress stood flanked by her Praetorian guard, resplendent in gleaming armor. "So," she said, voice dripping with disdain, "the upstart prince and his ragtag band have come to play at Revolution." Anthony's hand tightened on his weapon. He saw Gruss tense, ready to spring. Zoran stepped forward, every inch a leader despite his tattered clothing. "Your reign of tyranny ends today," the prince declared. The Praetorians charged, energy blades humming. Anthony reached for the last of their ancient artifacts, praying his modifications would work. As he activated it, the world turned white-hot and everything changed. The world snapped back into focus. Anthony blinked, his ears ringing from the artifact's discharge. The Praetorians lay crumpled on the floor, their armor scorched and smoking. In the center of the room, the Empress slumped against her throne, unconscious but alive. Zoran stepped forward, his face a mask of iron will. "It's over," he said softly. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity, The Empire's iron grip loosened, system by system. Anthony found himself thrust into the role of advisor, his human perspective valued as the fledgling Galactic Republic took shape. But peace, it seemed, was a fragile thing. 6 months after their victory, Anthony stood before the newly formed Galactic Council, his fingers drumming nervously on the datapad in his hands. The chamber buzzed with tense whispers as representatives from 100 worlds debated the latest crisis. "We have confirmed reports," Anthony began, his voice cutting through the din. "Grand Admiral Zartok has consolidated power in the Outer Rim. He's amassed a fleet and—" He swallowed hard. "Intelligence suggests he's reconstructing the Xenodyne Omega." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Anthony's gaze met Gruss's, seeing his own fear reflected in the captain's yellow eyes. "We must act now," Gruss growled, slamming a fist on the table. "Commit our forces before this madman can unleash that abomination." Zoran rose, his face creased with worry. "And risk becoming the very thing we fought to overthrow? We cannot build lasting peace through more violence." The debate raged on, with Anthony finding himself reluctantly siding with Gruss. His time among the stars had shown him the harsh realities that often lurked beneath lofty ideals. Days later, Anthony paced the bridge of the Zephyr, waiting for news of Jace's recon mission. The silence was shattered by a frantic transmission. "Mayday! Mayday!" Jace's voice crackled through the speakers. "Taking heavy fire!" The signal cut off in a burst of static. Anthony's heart raced as he plotted a rescue course. The desolate moon where Jace's fighter went down loomed before them, its surface scarred by recent battle. "No life signs," the sensor operator reported grimly. Anthony furrowed his eyebrows. "He's alive. I know it." He turned to Gruss. "I'm going in." The infiltration of Zartok's base pushed Anthony's ingenuity to its limits. He cobbled together a convincing technician's uniform, complete with forged credentials that got him past the first layer of security. His hands shook as he worked on the monstrous Xenodyne, all too aware of its apocalyptic potential. A muffled groan from a nearby corridor caught his attention. Heart pounding, Anthony slipped away from his workstation and followed the sound. In a dimly lit cell, he found Jace, battered, bruised, but miraculously alive. "Took you long enough," Jace croaked, managing a weak smile. Anthony worked feverishly to disable the cell's lock, acutely aware of the passing seconds. They were mere steps from freedom when a massive figure blocked their path. "Well, well," rumbled a deep voice. "What have we here?" Anthony found himself face to face with Grand Admiral Zartok himself. The warlord's cybernetic eye glowed an ominous red as he raised his weapon. "I don't know how you got this far," Zartok snarled, "but your little rescue mission ends here." Anthony's mind raced. He had no weapon, no backup. But he did have one advantage. The Xenodyne systems were fresh in his mind. With a desperate lunge, he hit his fist into a nearby control panel. Alarms blared. Zartok's eye widened in shock as the base's energy grid fluctuated wildly. In the chaos, Anthony and Jace slipped past the distracted warlord and sprinted for the hangar. They barely made it off the moon, Zartok's guns leaving the Zephyr's hull pockmarked with blast marks. As they limped back to Republic space, Anthony pored over the data he'd managed to steal. What he found chilled him to the bone. The Galactic Council chamber erupted into pandemonium as Anthony delivered his report. The Xenodyne was nearly operational. Zartok's fleets were mobilizing. The Republic's homeworlds lay exposed and vulnerable. In the midst of the uproar, Zoran stood. His face was etched with sorrow as he addressed the council. "I cannot condone what must be done," he said quietly. "I hereby resign my position." As the prince walked out, Anthony felt a piece of his idealism die. But there was no time for mourning. He turned to Gruss, seeing the same grim dedication in the captain's eyes. "What's our next move?" Anthony asked. Gruss's mandibles clicked. "We do what we must, with or without the council's blessing." Anthony nodded, his mind already racing with plans. They would need every scrap of human ingenuity, every alien alliance they'd forged, to have even a chance against Zartok's forces. As he left the chamber, Anthony knew that the true test of their fledgling republic was just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.